Hey everyone. So I want to take a look at this clip that's going around. Coleman Hughes interviewing Peter Beinart, talking about the right of return, the Palestinian right of return. And look, I like Coleman Hughes. I think he's sharp, but in this exchange, he lets Beinart get away with murder. So I want to play a piece of this and then unpack it, because there's so much wrong with what Beinart says here that if you only push back on the surface level claims, which is basically all Coleman did, then you're missing the whole game. So let's start with this clip here.
The people should have the right to go to this place in order to be safe. Surely a Palestinian refugee in Syria, in Lebanon, for that matter, in Gaza or the West Bank would have a better claim than me.
Yeah, they would have a claim if they're unsafe. They would have a claim to be a refugee and go anywhere in principle. That's like.
But what if they want to go to the place they're from?
I understand that, but the part of the impetus for Zionism was that there really was nowhere else to go, right? Effectively in the 1940s, it's like they couldn't come to America. If they could have come to America, that would have been great, as far as I'm concerned. But you know, what about the case of a Palestinian in America? Here's the point I was going to make. So, in the context of the two-state solution, as you know, part of the right of return demand is not a mere right of return for Palestinians to a future hypothetical Palestinian state or Palestinian statelet, where they would be in an ethnic majority, in an Arabic-speaking Muslim majority context, right? It's the right of return to the Jewish state. Right. And that was one of the sticking points in the 2000 negotiations, is not only do we want a right of return to the Arab state inside historic Palestine, we want a right of return to the Jewish state. So what justifies that logic?
Well, it's because when people who were from Haifa and Jaffa or Safed or many other places, their families were expelled from those places in the creation of a Jewish state. There could never have been a Jewish state created without those acts of mass expulsion.
Okay, let's stop it right there. There could never have been a Jewish state without those acts of mass expulsion, just sitting there stated as a fact, like it's not even up for debate. And Coleman does not push back on this. We'll see. We're going to watch the rest of this soon. He moves straight into this whole conversation about whether it's reasonable to want to live where your grandfather lived. We'll get to that. And it's fine. It's an interesting conversation, but you can't have that conversation until you've dealt with the premise underneath it. And the premise is all wrong. Coleman also talks about historic Palestine. You notice he threw that in there. I think that's just ignorance. He just does not know. And so there are three things going on in this clip that no one challenges. And once you see them, I'll help you see them. And this is where Beinart's argument falls apart. Number one, this whole framing assumes that there's this ancient continuous Palestinian people who had a homeland and got kicked out of it. And Beinart talks about, elsewhere in this interview, he talks about their civic national culture. He talks about families from Jaffa, like this is an old settled national identity, the way Jewish identity is. So this is a lie that the more history you know, the more obviously false it becomes. And this is one of the big issues with the history of Israel, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, is that the less you know about it, the more you will be against Israel. The more history you know, the more you end up being pro-Israel. It's kind of the way it always goes. So I've made this point before. Go find the leaders of the Arab movement in Palestine themselves, in their own words, before this Palestinian national identity got invented. And it got invented pretty late. It doesn't show up until like the 50s at earliest. In 1937, there was a guy named Auni Bey Abdul Hadi, and he tells the British Peel Commission, trying to sort out this whole area, and he told them, quote, "There's no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. There's no Palestine in the Bible. Our country was for centuries part of Syria." That's not me saying it. That's their own guy. And in 1946, Philip Heaty, an Arab American, a Princeton historian, testifying to the Anglo-American Committee, quote, "There's no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not." And then in 1947, the Arab Higher Committee, that's like the committee that represented the Arab people living in that land, just like the Jews had like the Jewish Agency, right? So the Arab Higher Committee's own representative tells the UN General Assembly the same thing, that Palestine is part of Syria, that the Arabs of Palestine aren't a separate political entity, right? They said that the word Palestine was a Jewish word because really the British brought that word in. No Arabs in the Middle East ever heard of that place or a place being called Palestine. They never heard that before. This whole region where Israel, Jordan, Syria, it was all just called Southern Syria. And even Syria wasn't a country. It was just a region. The guy who later becomes chairman of the PLO, Ahmed Shukeri, was quoted as once saying, "It is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing but southern Syria." So here's a fun game you can play with anyone who tells you about the ancient Palestinian nation. Ask them to name one person, a king, a sheikh, an emir, a leader, a famous author who was famous as a leader of the Palestinian people and known that way before the middle of the 20th century, or even the leader of the population in that land, some political figure who led them at some point 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago. Give me a name. You'll get silence. But here's the kicker that really seals it. From 1948 to 1967, I always bring this up. From 1948 to 1967, from the founding of the State of Israel till the Six-Day War, 19 years, the West Bank, what's called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, was governed by Jordan. The Gaza Strip was governed by Egypt, Arab rule in both of them. And during those 19 years, there was nobody anywhere who was raising the issue of the Palestinian people, who was talking about a Palestinian state. No one was talking about it. There was no such movement during that time. The demand only shows up after 1967. The second those territories come under Israeli control. If this was really about Palestinian self-determination, where was everyone for those 19 years? And that tells you everything, because it was never about a Palestinian state. It was always about not allowing Jews to be sovereign in the land. Number two, Bayrat says acts of mass expulsion. That there could never have been a Jewish state without acts of mass expulsion, like Israel ran a deportation campaign. And this is totally backwards. Let's deal with who actually started this. The Arab Higher Committee, before the partition vote even happened, before the UN partition vote in 1947, he said they would drench, quote, the soil of our beloved country with the last drop of our blood, end quote. The day after the UN passed the partition plan on November 29th, 1947, they said that they will fight for every inch of it. Al-Azhar, which is like the premier Islamic institute of higher education in Egypt, Al-Azhar's clerics called for a jihad. And their own guy, Jamal Husseini, tells the UN Security Council straight out in April of 1948, quote, "The representative of the Jewish Agency told us yesterday that they were not the attackers, that the Arabs had begun the fighting. We do not deny this. We told the whole world we were going to fight." Okay, that's not a Jewish historian. That's the Arab Higher Committee's own spokesman saying on the record that we, the Arabs, started it. And that's critical. They started a war against this. There's a UN partition plan. The Jews accept it. The Arabs refuse and attack. If they had accepted it, no one would have been displaced, not a single person. Now, what about the flight itself, the running away? Was it Israel pushing people out, expelling people? Listen to what their own people said at the time. At the time, not since then, not now that everything's been politicized and we have this whole Palestinian narrative, which is mostly BS. The Economist, October 1948. It talks about 62,000 Arabs who'd lived in Haifa. Fewer than 6,000 stayed. So almost all of them left, right? 90% of them left. And the most important factor, this is The Economist, not a pro-Israel publication. It says, quote, "Announcements made over the air by higher Arab executive urging the Arabs to leave." The Syrian prime minister at the time, Khaled al-Azam, wrote in his memoirs, and I want you to hear this, quote, "Since 1948, we have been demanding the return of the refugees to their homes, but we ourselves are the ones who encourage them to leave." End quote. There's a refugee quoted in a Jordanian newspaper in 1954 who said, quote, "The Arab government told us, get out so that we can get in. So we got out, but they did not get in," end quote. And here's the one that should end the debate every time. Mahmoud Abbas, the current president of the Palestinian Authority, has acknowledged in his own writing that Arabs fled places like Safed, which is where he's from, when the Arab Liberation Army retreated. And he's written that the invading Arab armies abandoned the Palestinians and forced them to leave. He's written that himself. That's the Palestinian Authority president, who now says that he blames the Israelis. He's written this, that it was the Arab armies who made them leave. So when Beinart says that there were these acts of mass expulsion, what he's actually doing is erasing both ends of the real story. A war the Arab side started to prevent the partition plan, and the mass flight of Arabs because their own leadership organized it, admitted that they did it, encouraged it. Number 3 problem here, and this is the one almost no one brings up, so I want you to remember this one. Every war in the 20th century produced refugees, every single one. And in every other case, those refugees got resettled and the story ended within a couple years, not 80 years. But a few years. After World War II, there were 12.5 million Germans who were expelled from Poland and Czechoslovakia, stripped of their property, no compensation. No one today is running a campaign for their grandkids to have a right to return to those towns. Finland absorbed 400,000 refugees from the Soviet Union, 11% of their entire population, as the side that lost the war. No international agency built around them. Turkey took in 150,000 refugees from Bulgaria in 1950. There's a great line from a report at the time comparing Turkey's refugees to the Arab world's refugees. It said the difference was entirely in spirit, meaning it wasn't about money or resources. Turkey decided that they were going to take these people in and make them part of their nation, and they got to work resettling them. The Arab states, as we're about to see, made the opposite choice. They kept their own people stuck in camps for decades as a political tool to demonize Israel. And then there's the big one. The one that really shows you what a normal war refugee situation is supposed to look like. The partition of India and Pakistan, which happened in the same era, 1947, almost the same time as the state of Israel. 14 million people were displaced. 14 million. 8 million Hindus left Pakistan for India. 6 million Muslims left India for Pakistan. And notice what actually happened. People moved to go live among their own. Hindus went to the Hindu majority state. Muslims went to the Muslim majority state. That's normal. That's the normal human response when countries break up and partition. Countries have been changing their borders and their governments forever. You move to where your national or religious or ethnic people are going. You go to where your own people are, where you're safe, where you belong. No one on either side demanded a right of return to the town they grew up in on the wrong side of the new border. They went and built their lives in a state that was now theirs. That's exactly what happened with the Jews. By the way, Jews built a Jewish state, and it's what should have happened with the Palestinian Arabs too. If a Palestinian state had ever been allowed to exist alongside Israel the way the UN intended, the way Arab countries claim they want, but they didn't do anything about it from 1948 to 1967. Instead, the demand became, no. We don't want to go to our own state. We want to go into the Jewish state. That's going to come up in this conversation in a bit. That's not how population exchange ever worked anywhere else in the modern era. The Palestinian case is the only one that's been kept open on purpose. UNRWA's own director wrote in 1951 that he expected the Arab governments to take over the refugee issue, take over the relief by mid-1952. There was a $200 million fund set up that same year to get people homes and jobs, and it sat untouched because the Arab states refused to resettle these people. Jordan was the only Arab country that gave any of them citizenship. Syria turned down international money specifically earmarked to help them resettle refugees. Lebanon said flat out there was no room. And then UNRWA changed its own definition of refugee in 1965 and then again in 1982, specifically so that Palestinian descendants could count as refugees forever. No other refugee population on the planet works that way. Not under the UN's own refugee agency standard, not anywhere. This isn't a refugee crisis that's lasted 80 years by accident. It's been kept alive on purpose because certain people have a strategic interest in the wound staying open. So now, with those three things on the table, let's go back to what Beinart says. Let's go see what he says next, because this just continues the conversation, but now you have some more context.
And so they believe that they have the right to return to the places that their families were expelled from, even if a Jewish state was created in those places. In fact, the Palestinians were willing to make pretty significant concessions on the right of return, according to a number of the negotiators at Camp David and the negotiations after Camp David. But I actually think, as a matter of principle, there is clearly in international law the Palestinian right to return. And as a human level, surely you can understand why a Palestinian whose family was from Jaffa would want to be able to return to Jaffa. And the fact that they were ethnically cleansed to create a Jewish majority state shouldn't be that compelling to them.
So hold on. I want to actually flag and be honest about what I have sympathy for and what I don't understand. What I have sympathy for is feeling the immense weight of the tragedy of your ancestors being driven out of a place, and that becoming the idea of that becoming almost a sacred issue to remember that suffering and to make sure the world remembers it. That I have sympathy for. I don't and can't relate to the idea of wanting to live where my grandfather lived. So I just want to be clear, like, I don't totally get that. I don't think that's necessarily a default view that people around the world have. I understand that the Palestinians have it, and that's part of their kind of civic national culture at this point. But I don't think it's default. I don't think it should be recognized as a universal right. And I'm curious, so like there's this distinction in the right of return between going back to an Arab Palestinian state and going back to the specific town that your grandparents lived in, right? And it's not obvious to me that supporting the right of return would mean the second thing rather than the first thing, like the first thing being way more practical. I mean, how specific do you get in your support of the right return? Is it like, obviously, like a lot of these villages don't exist in the way that they did. So it's like what level of specificity is required to meet this Palestinian demand of the right of return?
Well, the UN General Assembly 194, which has been reaffirmed like hundreds of times, originally passed in 1948, says, I'm going to quote from it, that Palestinians wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practical date. Now, it's true.
At the earliest practical date. He quotes half a sentence like it's a legal slam dunk, and he says it's been reaffirmed numerous times. Okay, here's what he leaves out. Talk about this resolution, 194. The very same resolution says that compensation should be paid to anyone who chooses not to return. They don't talk about that one. And it tells the Conciliation Commission to facilitate repatriation or resettlement elsewhere or rehabilitation. Three options. It's not a mandate to repatriate people. It has non-binding language. Specifically, it says they should be given the opportunity to do this. Okay. On top of that, the fact that the General Assembly resolutions are not legally binding to begin with. It's not international. Beinart, people who aren't informed, they go, oh, there's a UN General Assembly resolution 194. It sounds like it's been reaffirmed. It sounds like international law. That's not the way it works. And here's what really gets me about this one. The Arab states themselves unanimously rejected Resolution 194 when it came up in 1949. They only started waving it around as an absolute right once it was clear that they'd lost. But they rejected it. Beinart is citing as an ironclad international law a General Assembly resolution that the people he's speaking for rejected at the time, rejected it outright. But then when it became inconvenient that they rejected it, they said, okay, and then they started using it. Okay, let's do a little more of this clip. Here,
true. A lot of those homes are not there. So people would have to build new housing. I mean, Israel has done that before when large numbers of people have come. You would build housing.
So what's
yeah.
the unit? The town? Is the town the unit?
The places that you should be able to, you should be able to go. You have the choice to go. I'm not saying you should have the choice to kick someone else out of their home. If your family is from Jaffa and that particular home is not from Jaffa, I think there should be compensation. You should be able to buy another apartment in Jaffa.
Okay. So Coleman almost gets there. He asks the right question, and Beinart's answer, yes, the specific town, the specific house, if it still exists, sounds reasonable on the surface until you do the math. UNRWA says that there are 5.7 million Palestinian refugees today. That's UNRWA's number. Now, it's only a few 100,000 who actually left at the time. Israel's population, but UNRWA says there's 5.7 million. So I'm sure Beinart would say, yeah, 5.7 million Palestinian refugees. All the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Israel's population is about 9.6 million. Okay, roughly 7 million of them are Jewish. So with 5.7 million more people, you don't dilute the Jewish population. You actually eliminate the Jewish majority entirely. That's the demand. And here's the thing. Even the people running the Palestinian cause know it. Mahmoud Abbas, in cables that were later leaked, he didn't know this was going to be made public. He told his own negotiating team that it would be, quote, illogical to ask Israel to take in 5 million or indeed 1 million. That would mean the end of Israel. He admitted that. He knows it's unrealistic. Saru Nusseibeh, who's about as serious and moderate a Palestinian intellectual as you'll find, if there is one, he said the refugees should go to a future Palestinian state, not in a way that wipes out Israel's Jewish majority, because otherwise there's no such thing as a two-state solution. It's not a two-state solution if the Palestinians are going back to Jaffa. It's an erasure of Israel. So don't claim you want a two-state solution if that's what you're advocating for. So Beinart presents the town-by-town version like it's the careful, modest version. Oh, yeah, if people want to go back to Jaffa and they're from Jaffa, they should be able to go back there and get compensation. They know that this would end the Jewish state. That's what that one's about. Let's finish up.
And go to see the sea, which is like very important to people from there.
Right. So you should be able to go back to the specific town, even if that. So I mean, I'm thinking of Ben Ami's quote. Right. It's like,
which Ben Ami?
In Shlomo Ben Ami, who was among all the Israeli negotiators in 2000, certainly not the least sympathetic to Palestinian concerns, and ultimately, yeah, and he writes in his book, at a certain point, he was like exasperated by the right of return conversation because he couldn't understand what national movement wouldn't be premised on an ingathering of its exiles into its own state, rather than the neighboring state that you've been at war with and whose people you charge, rightly or wrongly, with your oppression for the past 80 years. Why wouldn't you want to gather your own people to your own state if you're a national movement? Why would you insist that they go next door to the Jewish state?
I mean, I think this is a really good explanation of why one shouldn't only read Israeli accounts of this, but also read Palestinian accounts as well. Because when you read Palestinian writing, it becomes super, super clear, right? That this territory was for them artificially divided and created into a Jewish state through an act of mass expulsion. They have a deep historical connection to particular places in this area, which was Palestine. And so to say that because of that there's going to be this new state created in the West Bank and Gaza, and they should only feel an affinity there, they're families that can trace back their connections in a place like Haifa and Jaffa for many generations. And it's precious to them. And we Jews should understand that better than anybody else because we've maintained that connection for 2,000 years.
I get it.
Okay. That's the end of the clip. So he brings up this Ben Ami question. This guy Shlomo Ben Ami is saying, I think it's the best moment in the whole clip. Why would any it's a great question. Why would any national movement insist that its refugees go live in the rival state, the one it's been at war with, instead of gathering them into its own emerging state? That's much better. You can build a society. Why would you want Palestinians to go live in the Jewish state, go live in Tel Aviv and Jaffa? Every national movement in history has wanted to gather its people into its own state. Beinart's answer is to turn it into a question about feelings. Read the Palestinian accounts, understand the depth of their connection. Especially we Jews should understand what that feels like, right? And that's a smart move by Beinart, but it doesn't answer the question. It just makes the question sound rude to keep asking it, because how can you deny people that sentiment of going back to where they're from? The grief about Jaffa is real. No one's denying that. But the grief and the political demand to end the Jewish state through demographics is something else entirely. Right? That's what Beinart's doing. He's trying to get you to feel bad about even asking the question. So here's where I land on this. None of this means that the people who lost their homes in 1948 didn't lose something. It happened. And some of them are probably really upset about it. I get that. But Beinart's entire argument depends on you not asking three questions. Is this actually an ancient national identity, or was it invented for political reasons very recently? And the answer is, of course, the second. Was this actually an Israeli expulsion campaign, or a war that the Arab side started, and then the Arabs who started the war also were the ones who told their people to leave en masse? Okay, that's the second. And the third is, why is this the only refugee population out of dozens in the same century that has been kept in limbo for 80 years instead of being resettled like everyone else in a place where they're with people like them? Once you ask those three questions, the specific claims about General Assembly Resolution 194 or Jaffa or Ben Ami, you don't even need to address those. All right, that's the breakdown here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please share this one. This is exactly the kind of debate where people need the fuller picture. Yeah. Whatever. I think Coleman needs a bit of an education on the Middle East. Maybe if someone wants to introduce me to him, I'll try to start the process myself. He's a good man. We like Coleman Hughes. All right, God bless. Thanks for watching.